Humphrey Bogart, one of Hollywood's most iconic tough guys, wasn't always the master of his fate. Early in his career, Bogart signed a suffocating contract with Warner Brothers that boxed him into a narrow typecast: the snarling gangster or hardened detective. No matter how much he longed to show his range, the studio had total control over his roles. Even worse, the contract included a notorious suspension clause, which meant if Bogart refused a role, he'd be suspended without pay, and the lost time would be tacked onto the end of his contract. So he wasn't just punished, he was trapped longer. As his fame grew, Bogart fought back, even forming his own production company later, but the early years were defined by studio strangleholds. Despite his A-list status, he had little say in his own career path. The roles that made him a legend also chained him to an identity he didn't always choose. In an era of studio dominance, Bogart's contract was a golden cage, glittering but locked tight. Jean Harlow, Hollywood's original blonde bombshell, lit up the screen with her beauty and charm, but behind the glamour was a brutal contract that nearly ruined her. When she signed with MGM in the early 1930s, Harlow became a commodity, not an artist. Her contract gave the studio absolute control, not just over her roles, but her public image, clothing, weight, and even relationships. MGM forced her to play the sultry sex symbol again and again, despite her desire for more serious and varied roles. But the worst clause? She wasn't allowed to take time off, not even when her health was deteriorating. MGM worked her relentlessly, prioritizing box office dollars over her well-being. When she fell ill during the filming of Saratoga, the studio initially downplayed her condition, pressuring her to keep working. She died at just 26, with her contract never giving her the freedom or the care she deserved. Jean Harlow's tragic story shows how the studio system could grind down even its brightest stars, all hidden behind airtight legal clauses and golden promises. Veronica Lake's peekaboo hairstyle made her a World War II icon, but behind that glamorous curtain was a studio contract that wrecked her career and spirit. Signed with Paramount, Lake was typecast in femme fatale roles, sultry, mysterious, and icy, because that's what sold. But what audiences didn't know was that her contract locked her into these parts, with almost no say in her roles or public image. When she attempted to change her look, cutting her hair for the war effort, studio executives were furious. They claimed her new look made her unmarketable, and her popularity quickly declined. Even worse, her contract included strict morality clauses and behavioral expectations. Her struggles with mental health and alcohol were seen as violations, giving the studio reason to suspend or fine her instead of helping her. Veronica Lake's downfall wasn't just personal. It was manufactured by a system that used her up and tossed her aside when she no longer fit the mold. Her contract didn't just define her career, it destroyed it. A classic case of a star shaped, then shattered by legal chains. Mae West was a woman far ahead of her time, bold, bawdy, and unapologetically sexual. But even her fierce independence couldn't shield her from the clutches of a punishing Hollywood contract. When West signed with Paramount Pictures in the 1930s, her films were instant hits, raking in millions during the Great Depression. Yet instead of rewarding her, the studio tied her to a restrictive contract that silenced the very voice that made her famous. The worst clause? Censorship. Her scripts had to be heavily reviewed and rewritten to comply with the New Hays Code, Hollywood's strict moral guidelines. Even though West wrote her own material, her contract gave final script approval to studio censors. She watched as her wit and innuendos were stripped down, neutered by morality police. And if she objected? Suspension without pay. Mae West, the woman who once said, "I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it," eventually saw that fortune dry up. The studio muzzled her, dimming the spark that made her a star. Her career didn't fade, it was legally strangled. John Wayne, the Duke himself, may have embodied rugged independence on screen, but behind the scenes, his early Hollywood career was anything but free. In the 1930s and 40s, Wayne signed multiple contracts with low-budget studios like Republic Pictures and Monogram, which locked him into long-term, low-pay agreements. One brutal clause tied him to a flat salary, regardless of how successful his films became. While his movies raked in profits, Wayne saw none of the windfall. Even as his fame exploded, his contract barred him from negotiating for better roles or higher pay elsewhere without studio approval. The worst part? These studios often churned out B-movie westerns, stalling his artistic growth and nearly pigeonholing him forever. It wasn't until he broke away and co-founded Batjack Productions that he began to control his destiny. But for years, the Cowboy King was just another pawn in the studio system, underpaid, overworked, and unable to steer his own path. His contract may not have tamed the man, but it certainly tamed his career, until he fought back Hollywood style. Judy Garland's voice lit up the world, but her studio contract dimmed her life behind the curtain. Signed to MGM as a teenager, Garland was thrust into stardom under one of the most exploitative contracts of the Golden Age. MGM controlled every aspect of her life: her weight, her appearance, her behavior, and even her medication. One of the most damaging clauses? The studio had the right to enforce performance conditioning, which in Judy's case meant being fed amphetamines to stay thin and energized, followed by sleeping pills to crash, day after day. Her contract also allowed for suspensions without pay if she refused roles, leading to a cycle of pressure, punishment, and dependency. Garland was a golden asset to MGM, but her well-being was a distant afterthought. She was worked to exhaustion, and when her health broke down, they labeled her difficult and tossed her aside. Her downfall wasn't just tragedy, it was corporate cruelty inked into her contract. Judy Garland may have given Hollywood magic, but in return, her studio gave her a lifetime of pain. Rita Hayworth, the love goddess of the 1940s, was the epitome of glamour, but her contract told a darker story. Signed to Columbia Pictures under studio head Harry Cohn, Rita's contract bound her to a carefully manufactured identity that erased her roots. Born Margarita Cancino, she was forced to change her name, undergo painful electrolysis to raise her hairline, and dye her hair red, all dictated by contractual image clauses. But the worst clause was the studio's control over her personal life. She needed permission to marry, to travel, even to attend events. When she wed Prince Ali Khan, Columbia retaliated by halting her career and suspending her for violating obligations. Her contract also denied her a fair share of the profits from her own blockbuster hits. Cohn treated her like property, micromanaging every move while denying her agency or equity. Off-screen, she was shy and soft-spoken, a stark contrast to her fiery screen persona, which wasn't hers to control. Rita Hayworth once said, "Men fell in love with Gilda, but they woke up with me." Her contract made sure of that. She never owned her own legend. Josephine Baker dazzled the world with her fearless performances, but her Hollywood story is one of racism, rejection, and ruinous contracts. When Baker returned to the U.S. after becoming a sensation in France, Hollywood didn't welcome her with the stardom she deserved. The contracts offered to her were laced with humiliating limitations. Studios demanded she play only stereotypical roles, maids, dancers, or exotic temptresses, never leading ladies. One proposed contract even included a clause requiring her to tone down her Frenchness and adopt a more American Negro dialect, a grotesque attempt to strip her of her identity. Worse, she was offered far less pay than her white counterparts, and contracts banned her from sharing top billing or romantic scenes with white actors. Josephine, proud and unyielding, refused to sign. As a result, she was blackballed by the industry. Hollywood contracts weren't just unfair, they were systemically racist. Baker's legacy soared internationally, but her American film career was crushed before it could begin. Her refusal to bow to these degrading clauses made her a legend, but at the cost of a Hollywood crown she should have worn.